I never wore Yeezys, that's a fact. Every week is fashion week for me.
When Andrew moved into his new town, he had no idea he was going to fall in love at first sight with a beautiful woman that is married. She was shopping for food at the market. When he saw her ethereal and a light white dress, her hair loose over her shoulders, she was breathtakingly. He was smitten, and he knew it. He simply couldn't stop looking at her. She invaded his dreams and his thoughts during the day. He had to know who she was, so the next time he saw her at the market, which was a Sunday, he followed her all around the marketplace. Then to her home. Every instinct told him he was making a mistake and that it was wrong, but he also couldn't help himself. She didn't live far from the market, and he saw her walk into a small, well-kept cottage and watched her enter and closed the door. Andrew found a window and opened it further. He peered in, and to his disappointment, he saw a man with her. She was smiling at him, and the man didn't smile back. "You're late," he said. "What took you so long? When will you cook my meal?" "I'm sorry, dear husband, I'll cook your lunch right away." Andrew felt his heart sink. The woman he had fallen in love with was married. But he couldn't. There's a lure that kept him rooted to the spot. She was no longer in his visions as she headed into another room. His eyes turned to the man, who produced a knife and then placed a stone on the table and began sharpening the knife. Andrew watched the man. This man should have been happy and considered himself lucky to be married to such a beautiful and kind-natured woman, yet he was not. There was something off about the man who sat there sharpening knives. A few minutes later, Nur came back into the room. "I cooked your favorite today, dear Amir," but he still didn't crack a smile. He remained stoic, and Remy noted the way the husband's hand gripped tight around the knife when Nur neared him. He let go and ate his meal while Nur sat down next to him talking about her day. When a meal was done, she took away the plate and washed the dishes. Andrew found it odd that Nur hadn't eaten yet. When she returned, Amir spoke to her somberly. "It's a full moon night. You will stay indoors and close all the windows and lock all the doors." Nur nodded. Obediently, she turned towards the window, and Andrew ducked. It was time for him to go. He returned home and gave himself every reason there was to not go back and see her. But as the night fell and the moon rose, Andrew couldn't resist the temptation of seeing her again. The door was closed, the window shut, and he heard the cries of a woman and then a man screaming at her. His heart gripped with terror, but Andrew gathered up his courage and advanced towards the house. "Stay away," he heard Nur below from inside. "Don't hurt me, no." Her pained cries gave Andrew to push himself against the door over and over. Until he heard the wood crack, he leapt inside. And was horrified at the sight before him. Noah was cowering in the corner, the shadows masking her. Amir was standing before him and a hammer in his hand. His face contorted in an ugly grimace. "Get away from her," Andrew cried out, and went over to her. "No," Amir warned as Andrew approached Nur. Andrew took a candle from the table and went to Nur. She was turned and facing the wall, and he noticed a nail sticking out of the back of her neck. "You brute, how could you do this to your wife?" He reached over to pull out the nail, but Amir grabbed his wrist. "You don't know what you're doing." Andrew ignored the R8 man and took hold of the nail, and he pulled as hard as he could. "Leave her," Amir shouted. But Andrew didn't listen. Using all his strength, he pulled the nail that was brought deep into his neck, and Amir jumped back. He heard her cry at first, and then suddenly there was silence. Not even an owl hooted. A sweet floral fragrance wafted into his nostrils. He looked at a mirror and saw the color rush out his face. His eyes were wide with terror. Andrew looked back at Nura and felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. His heart skipped a beat and his hands turned cold. Nura was no longer the dainty woman he had seen and fallen in love with at the market. The smell of flowers was completely replaced by the stench of rotting flesh. Then a strong gust of wind hit Andrew from the back and exposed Nura's monstrous face. Her eyes glowed red and her wide mouth was filled numerous pointed teeth. She lunged forward and Andrew prepared for an attack only to realize she'd gone after Amir. Using her sharp nails, she easily penetrated his abdomen. A pool of blood formed beneath them. Andrew stood aside frozen watching Noura eating the organs. As Noura slurped it all, Andrew kept willing himself to head for the door and run, but he couldn't. He was frozen with fear, his mind unable to grasp that the beautiful woman was just a facade. Noura licked her blood-soaked hands, and then her eyes found him. She uttered a deep growl. Andrew shivered, but he was finally able to move. He shattered his frozen stance and ran towards the door, but Noura was already slamming the door shut. The Pontianak is the ghost of a pregnant woman who died during childbirth, or at the hands of men. She returns from the dead with vengeance, determined to exact revenge and retribution from men. In order to do so, the Pontianak transforms into a beautiful woman in order to lure her prey. She then eats them up, leaving behind a bloody scene of horror. She starts her hunt when there is a full moon. When the Pontianak is near, dogs howl, and you will smell a floral scent. If the environment becomes unusually quiet and dogs whine, she is near.